Ashes of the Last Dragon. Chapter 6. Shattered Hopes. Cole lost track of how long he'd paced the cramped interior of his home. The oil lamp on the table sputtered, its flame flickering off the rough walls in jagged shapes. Each time he glanced at Lily, lying under a thin blanket, his heart clutched as though caught in a vice. The remedy he'd forced her to swallow had yet to show any effect. Her labored breaths cut the silence like a saw. He rubbed his temples, desperate thoughts churning. If only he hadn't wasted time. If he'd gone straight to the alchemist and come right back, Lily might be stable now. Instead, he had wandered into the woods after those strange ashes, chasing a nameless curiosity. He couldn't stop replaying the sequence in his head, the hours he'd lost, the moments he could never reclaim. Although the alchemist had been bundling the cure as he arrived to the shop, but his fear wouldn't allow him to forgive his choice. His eyes drifted to the small urn on the mantel.
"Father,"
he whispered, voice raw.
"I should have been faster. Why'd I let myself get distracted?"
No answer came from the silent clay container. Cole heard only Lily's weak coughing and the soft shuffle of his feet on the rough floor. A memory flickered unbidden. Lily, perched in the high branches of an apple tree when they were children, fearlessly dropping apples for him to catch. He saw her laughing in the sunlight, telling him to loosen up, to smile more. The warmth of that moment made the frigid reality now feel so much harsher. He sank onto a stool, clutching her pale hand.
"Please,"
he murmured, leaning close.
"Stay with me."
Her eyelids fluttered, but she didn't respond. The hollowness in her cheeks seemed more pronounced by the hour, and a bluish hue darkened the skin around her eyes. The plague's hold was tightening. Cole cursed himself for every minute he'd spent gawking at that bizarre cold fire in the forest. He remembered the faint pulses of the shard he'd pried from the ash, a puzzle piece for a mystery, one that might have cost him Lily's life. A sudden, ragged exhale from Lily startled him. Her body tensed for a heartbeat. Then she stilled, her breath caught in a soft gasp. Cole lurched forward, gripping her shoulders.
"Lily!"
His voice trembled.
"Lily!"
She didn't answer. Her thin chest rose in one last feeble twitch and went still. Her eyes, half-lidded, stared at some distant point. An awful silence settled in the room, broken only by Cole's pounding heartbeat. He placed a trembling hand against her throat, searching for the faint flutter of a pulse. There was nothing. The stillness that enveloped him was worse than any roar or scream could have been. Lily, his only family left, had slipped away, right in front of him. Shock paralyzed him for a breathless second. Then a wave of grief crashed into his chest, and he let out a hoarse cry.
"No! No, no!"
Pulling her gently into his arms, he rocked her slack form, tears burning his eyes. He had sworn he wouldn't fail her. He had promised he would be back in time. But she was gone. In that blur of anguish, he caught sight of a dull gleam at the edge of his cloak. The shard. His hands shook as he drew it out. Something cold and lifeless about the shard mocked him. It lay there, heavy and unfeeling, despite what it had cost.
"If I hadn't gone,"
he rasped, pressing his forehead to Lily's.
"Just a few more minutes, Lily would still be alive."
His tears splashed onto the shard's dark surface. In a surge of despair and rage, he set Lily gently down and jumped to his feet, clutching the shard in his fist.
"You took me away from her,"
he hissed through gritted teeth, tears still streaking his cheeks.
"I hate you. I hate this."
Cole didn't fully understand the object's power or origin, but he knew, without a doubt, it was the reason he hadn't made it back in time. With every ounce of bitterness and regret, he squeezed his hand closed. A crack like shattered glass rang out, and slivers bit into his palm. A sudden rush of cool energy lanced up his arm, freezing him in place. The room seemed to darken, as if a silent wind blew out the lamp. He felt a force coiling in his chest, a nameless surge that snapped across his nerves and pulsed against his temples. For a split second, he heard nothing but his own heartbeat, impossibly loud in his ears. Then the shard's fragments glowed an eerie blue-black in his clenched fist, before disintegrating into a swirl of fine ash. Cole stumbled, pressing his free hand to his forehead. It was like a door in his mind had been thrown open, and cold air rushed in. His vision blurred. For an instant, he thought he saw faint wisps of dark flame flickering at the edges of his sight, curling like ghostly tendrils. A sense of presence hovered just beyond comprehension. Something new had awakened, and it crowded his every thought.
What?
Cole gasped, dropping to one knee. The swirling ash dissipated in the lamplight, as if it had never existed. Yet he felt it coursing through him, an undercurrent of potent strength laced with an icy dread. It was all so wrong, so hollow, especially with Lily's limp body lying just behind him. He knelt there, panting for what felt like an eternity. Grief tangled with shock, and he let out a strangled cry, half in mourning for Lily, half in panic at whatever he had just unleashed. There was no voice, no explanation, only the crushing weight of loss and a terrible sense that everything had changed. The shattered remains of the shard fell away from his hand, each tiny fragment dissolving as if consumed by invisible flames. His palm stung where the splinters had cut him, but it was nothing compared to the agony in his chest. Cole forced himself back to Lily's side, gathering her against him in a final embrace.
I'm sorry,
he whispered, voice breaking.
I would do anything to have you back.
In the cold hush of that moment, his father's urn loomed in his peripheral vision, still silent, still offering no miracle. Cole closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. The world had lost its light in the span of a few heartbeats. And though he could not yet grasp the nature of what was stirring inside him, one truth cut through the haze of grief. He would give anything to have Lily back, but that was a price no one could ever repay.